the thing about being a midwife's husband, you almost have to go to boot camp for that. And that's because she has a very different attitude, and that usually, what she's talking about, there's sometimes some doctors that have some midwives. She ain't like that. We went to our community. There was a couple of guys who joined up with our community, and they said, well, we'd like to go out and you need a doctor. So these guys went out and became doctors. Then they came back, and so she was a midwife who had doctors. And that was how it got. When I was talking to the farm ladies, I said something about I'm kind of bossy sometimes, and they said, what are you going to do about that? What she says. And so she had a crew of guys who were just like, and I told the farm guys, I said, you're supposed to be like knights. You're supposed to pledge your sword to a lady. But you're supposed to protect those who need protecting, and teach the boys to be good to the girls. And so we have, what I had the blessing of supporting her practice, is the whole community believes in that, and it's part of our ways. And I love midwives. You know what? Midwives are better drivers than average. Because they have to go to hospitals in a hurry sometimes, and they got to be good at it. And midwives got great politics. None of them are for the bomb or the war or anything. They got a great attitude about sex, mostly great hugs. So it's a whole culture that she's had a lot to do with shaping. And so it's not just the farm ladies that are proud of her, it's the farm men too.
Well, it's interesting when you see how much work it takes. I mean, you call it labor for a reason. It takes a lot of work to bring a human life in, and to give it respect. Because, I never used the word, I was raised, in a religious tradition. My grandmother was the wife of a Presbyterian minister, and they ran an orphanage, in Missouri. And, but the word holy was one that I wouldn't have used, as a child except while singing. But when I was first exposed to birth, in this home context, that's when I felt that energy, that I thought, this is holy, this is sacred, and we should treat it as such, because it's not just this mechanical process. And I think that the education of our doctors could be so much better than it is now if it were more informed by the attitudes that we midwives develop in this milieu that we work, where we have such respect for what it takes to bring that life in, and how much work, inside work it is for that woman or that couple to do together, how much love there is created potentially if you do it right, if you don't make the whole thing an exercise in getting through something that's fearsome. But if you approach it as a chance to become, to experience the capacities of your body that's there. I think that doctors can easily forget that even the surgeon depends upon nature. Because when you cut somebody open, you are not the one that fixes that. You may stitch them together, but it's nature that heals that wound. And it's easy to forget that. I think a lot of times the language, and here's where my English major training comes in.
We're both have masters in English.
He too. But when I started reading obstetrics textbooks, I thought, why does this sound like a manual about a car? I'm not a machine. And when that first doctor who was explaining to me why I was going to have forceps delivery was my first baby, simply because she was my first baby, and he said, your iron hard perineum, and I went, my what? is going to be, and the baby's head's going to be like a battering ram against this iron-hard perineum. And I thought, you're not talking about my body. I later thought, well, he got that out of a book. So some of the writing has been powerfully wrong in obstetrics. And to me, it's just very interesting to look at these textbooks and go, life-saving information right there, and crazy, crazy stuff on the next page. And I think part of it is because we, in Western European culture, don't include ourselves in the web of life. Somehow we're supposed to be both better than all the other mammals, but then when you get to birth and reproduction, we're supposed to be worse than all the mammals. And sadly, whereas I thought video offered a lot of good possibilities for helping us look at birth less superstitiously. And I think we've been superstitious about birth ever since we dispensed with the midwifery profession as being something essential. And so we have a century-old veering away from connection with nature here. And that's built a kind of fear. And so that now people who are being educated are just seeing birth that's so messed with, they don't really know, they wouldn't even recognize what it would be like if you didn't have that messing with as part of the process. We met together, an obstetrician who's a few years older than Stephen in Japan. And even through the language barrier, Stephen and this Dr. Yoshimura had the same philosophy. It was like, men are supposed to, he says, you have to risk your life for these women, didn't he?
Yeah.
It was just the same place. He says, you got to be willing to lay down your life. And he says, I'll sit there at births and sometimes I'll be terrified because it's been going on for a long time and I know I'm outside of what all my colleagues would say was okay. And yet,
it was
he'll
a
do
great
it.
deal of fun to watch these Japanese obstetricians say, "Eine May-san." And he knew she was a hot one. And he told me, he said, you were quite Genki.
Genki.
And I don't know about that. So then later on I found that the key is chi, actually. He was saying I had a good chi.
Well, he said that you have energy, And he talked about that women who are laboring and they're not afraid and they're not medicated, he says they have a kind of mystic beauty.
Oh.
And I said, that is so true, because that's what I saw the first time I was privileged to see this woman give birth in the parking lot. I didn't think you were going to look so good when you were having a baby, and yet she looked better than usual. She was a pretty woman already, but I mean, she looked, I couldn't take my eyes off of her. And I've heard other doctors talk about that, and it's almost like they're describing a spiritual experience when they see birth outside of a medical setting and they see what they've been denying women. They change, and then they want to take a different course because they go, oh, I had no idea what I was cheating women out of. So what I think we're about here is that our experience could inform hospital birth if we could get over our superstitions about how poorly designed the human female is, and recognize that if an English major could come in and excel, and it wasn't like I had to learn everything in the first 50 or 100 births, I just had to know, okay, what's dangerous? What do you go to the hospital for? And that was one of the first things I wanted to learn. And then I'm going to go at the first sign we have a complication so I don't bring in a mess. And through that I learned that when you do need a C-section, you often have some time. If you are paying attention to early signs, she's not in danger immediately in most cases. You can get her there in plenty of time. And even if you are in the hospital, again, you can't get in the operating room just like that. There'll be some things that'll have to be gotten ready for you. So it isn't like that home birth is the big, big risk that we tend to accept without critiquing it in the society. We forget that before, let's see, who was our first U.S. president? Jimmy Carter was born at home. Reagan, all of these people were born at home. We forget how, just about everybody you heard of, older than they are, was born at home. And now we've just sort of, in the last 20 years or so, accepted this mythology that that's the worst thing that could happen, when it's actually, I think, a necessary thing in every single country to maintain some kind of connection with nature, so that you actually don't fall into the superstition of thinking we are the only messed up species of mammal.
I was thinking about how much Dr. Williams loved you guys.
Oh, we loved him back. We did. Because his 16 years of experience with the Amish community informed him, and he said, hey, it was the hospitals where babies and women had infections. Those women, they were giving birth on farms, and they were Amish, and sometimes there was a fly in the room. They didn't get infection. So he had to learn more. It was his continuing education that removed him from that sort of superstitious view that he had learned in his medical training.
Sometimes when he'd come to see our midwives, he had a hippie shirt, a very bright colored shirt that he would wear when he came out. We have a picture of him with the midwives all around him and smooching him.
He was a Marine Corps vet, just like Stephen.
Yeah, we were both Marine Corps combat veterans.
So we owed him a lot. And I've never been down on doctors. I think doctors have been cheated out of the education that they should get. I think the Dutch had it right, and the Dutch, up to fairly recently had sort of 1 in 3 births would be an intended home birth. And this meant that their obstetricians had a different philosophy during the same, period of time when ours had this philosophy that birth always has to be in the hospital. They were going, no. But they thought that when you're taking a doctor in training, that they should be taught a thorough grounding of normal birth first.
Yeah.
Before you teach them the scary things that a doctor must be taught.
Right.
Because surgery's scary, And so don't make the surgical birth the first thing they see. Send them out first with a home birth midwife, so they'll learn what makes birth go right most of the time. And then when you have a situation where there is something wrong, it stands out like a sore thumb, and you go, hey, that's not right. Now we go to hospital. So that way you don't get physicians who carry this fear of birth into the room, and that affects every woman that they deal with from forevermore. So that's, I think, if we could get that understood and have a better use of our resources and say, look, we have to have obstetricians, we have to have midwives. In the countries with better outcomes than we have, you have a greater number of midwives than you have obstetricians. This is a better way to spend your resources. And when you spend your resources in a better way, you actually will be rewarded with better outcomes. And this really makes sense, because in today's environment, you have obstetricians that cannot afford to live in a greater part of the country. Obstetricians cluster in urban areas because only there can they manage to meet the cost of their malpractice insurance. And they can't have a busy enough practice in a small town. And how much of the U.S. lives in small towns and rural areas? About half. So we actually have a lot of women that don't get prenatal care that they need to get because obstetricians aren't thinking in a system-wide way. And certainly our insurance industry is not considering that it should have to think about the public health and in a system-wide way. They're only out to please their shareholders. So we have actually, in the U.S., the for-profit insurance industry prevents doctors from learning even all of the skills that they should have to have a full set of obstetrical skills. They're no longer permitted to do breech births and to teach that to incoming doctors. And that can mean trouble for babies, it can mean trouble for women, and even some women die because of this lack of skills that's been allowed to develop over the last 30 years or so.
Can you just close with something about the farm and the statistics around
Yeah.
the farm? Yeah.
Okay, so in our first 400 births, we had 2 C-sections, and that includes the first birth I ever saw. So that should tell you something about the American woman's pelvis. Okay, I could not have learned to be a surgeon in the way I did. I couldn't just have dived in and had a surgeon give me a little course, 2 hours, and equip me to be a surgeon. I couldn't have become a dentist, but I could become a midwife. So that should tell you something about nature. And over 40 years, we've kept our statistics. Our C-section rate is 1.7%. And when I began, overall in the US, it was 5%. It's now 34%. And I've always felt like I should make our statistics available. We've had breastfeeding has been 99% with the women that we could measure, where we knew far into postpartum how long they were able to breastfeed. So we found everybody could breastfeed. We didn't separate mothers and babies at birth. We had minimal complications, a few, yes, about 5% needing to go into the hospital, but fewer than 2% of those being an emergency transport, in other words, driving fast. And we seem to have been pretty good at preventing premature birth. Again, working with nutrition, and midwives are able to get the attention of women, and sometimes somebody whose nutritional basis wasn't so good at the beginning of a pregnancy, we could remedy it and actually keep her from having complications and becoming a healthier woman during her pregnancy, so she could go ahead and give birth without any problems.
And the midwives were backed up if there was only one pickup truck running on the farm.
We were the ones that got the men, because you have to realize that the farm wasn't, we were carving a village out of the wilderness.
1,000 acres of oak trees.
So all of these good data from the 70s were done as we were almost like, we weren't like a concentration camp because we were voluntarily there, but we were like a 24-hour, 7 days a week reality show. And we actually did survive.
And the neighbors have picked up some of our ways too.
Yeah, we had no electricity, we had no running water, and yet we were able to make birth safe. So we're like the Amish in a lot of ways, just a little more colorful. And we wanted birth control.
They call us Technicolor Amish.